The Short Fuse podcasts are conversations with artists, writers, musicians, and others whose art reveals our communities through their lens and stirs us to seek change. I'm Elizabeth Howard, the producer and host of the Short Fuse podcast. We've recently introduced reading groups designed to reflect the creative process of the author. Each one is unique. In this first series, we're talking with Gay Walley, the author of the Venus as She Ages collection, 6 novels. Thank you for joining us. You can learn more about the Short Fuse and our reading groups at shortfusepodcast.com. Thank you. Welcome to the Short Fuse podcast reading group, when we open the pod to ideas and conversation. We've been reading through author Gay Walley's collection of novels, Venus as She Ages. We discussed the first novel in the collection that was previously published in 1999, Strings Attached, in April. In this book, we meet young Mira and her alcoholic father, who's brought her up in seacoast bars. The second novel, To Any Length, was the book we discussed in May. We learned our protagonist's thoughts about marriage, to be or not to be. Our spring readings ended in June with Prison Sex. Is a relationship like being confined? In September, we picked up with The Bed You Lie In. Who are the people we are attracted to, and why? Do we always make the correct choices? Tonight, we are reading Right, She Said. We have learned through all the narratives that Mira is happiest when she's writing, working in her East Village flat, or in this case, in a stunning hotel with other writers. Tonight, Terese Svoboda, an author of 20 books and a Guggenheim Fellow, and a winner of many prizes, including the Bobst Prize in Fiction, the Ohio Prize for Poetry, an Ennia Grant for Translation, the Graywolf Nonfiction Prize, the O. Henry Award for the Short Story, and a Pushcart Prize for the Essay, is going to lead the conversation. And Terese has a book coming out in March of 2023 called Dog on Fire. It's being published by University of Nebraska Press. So I hope you will all watch for that. And before Terese begins, the two of us are going to do a reading from Right, She Said. And Terese is going to play the part, or read the part of Mira, and I will be Marguerite Duras. So Terese, I believe you begin.
It goes without saying, I said, fishing in a way, that I've read every one of your books. Even tigers are better looking. And to me, I continued with a flourish, they're incomparable. No one understood, like you did, how vulnerable a woman really feels. She did something so unlike most writers today, so unlike our time of Lady Gaga and Beyonce's mother and God knows whom else. She ignored the compliment as if it were boring. Instead, she said,
of course, what I did when I was broke and confused about life was marry someone. I have never understood why you don't consider that.
I didn't answer because I didn't understand it either. I ignored her and asked, do you remember that line in the quartet? She looked around her austere studio, and the Jewess's hunger for the softness and warmth of life was naked in her eyes.
Yes, she said, you could never use the word Jewish in that nowadays.
We were both quiet again for a bit while I tried to figure out what the hell was going on. And then she interrupted the silence with,
I wouldn't say that was particularly one of my better lines.
Well, maybe not, I asserted, but it spoke to me.
That must be because you must want some softness and warmth in your life. I'm not saying I was any good at getting it myself. In fact, usually not at all. I had married, as you know, 2 men who went to prison, and even the other one was a bit of a weakling. I mean, we all are, aren't we? But we were sort of weaklings together in the same boat. In other words, and now she got a bit serious with me, I let myself be had. This, she said, looking at her drink, notwithstanding.
She was reprimanding me for not being vulnerable enough. She meant I should learn to trust someone enough to give myself to them, to share my fate. Somehow she knew I've never been able to do that. Look, I said defensively, I too have done my share of linking up with weak men. Believe me, I just don't close any deals. I don't marry them.
Because you don't want to be married.
Oh, I do, and I don't.
With everybody, she said impatiently, does and doesn't.
I nodded, and then I said, well, what was one of your favorite lines?
From that book?
If you can remember.
Of course I can remember.
And she closed her eyes and sat back, and her skin was soft and so pale, it almost lit the dark, and she recited,
still there were moments when she realized that her existence, though delightful, was haphazard. It lacked, as it were, solidity. It lacked the necessary fixed background.
That's from Quartet 2, I said.
I know. I sipped my drink. I don't know why I keep quoting from that particular book.
Well, she's so damn good at this that I think I'll just say she's Jean Rhys.
Thank you, Terese. And let me...
Hell not.
Yes. So I will turn it over to you.
Okay, great. So I don't know if you ever mentioned this before, but Gay did publish a few books before. Strings Attached, which was a finalist for the Capricorn and Pirates Alley Faulkner Award. The Erotic Fire of the Unattainable, Aphorisms of Art, Love, and Vicissitudes of Life, which was a finalist for the Paris Book Award. Lost in Montreal, and Duet. And now, of course, this wonderful cornucopia of these 6 all in one swoop. And full disclosure, Gay and I have enjoyed reading our work to each other for nigh on 30 years, give or take various lapses. So I've nearly seen everything of her writing at birth. Like a miracle, she came up with another 15 or so pages every 2 weeks or a month. It's been very inspiring and very animating, and I'm so delighted to talk about Write, She Said, which is a writer's novel, a disarming book of ideas, of brio and bio. How about that? Okay, so just to give a little bit of background of our reading, our heroine had just seen Jean Rhys in a bar in downtown New York City. And that's the first time she does this trompe l'oeil thing of making the reader believe it's Jean, which I think is pretty cheeky, putting famous authors in a fiction and having them talk. Actually, it's kind of a fan fiction. Anyway, I wondered, Gay, if you knew of any other novels that talk to dead authors that serve as a model.
I actually don't know any others. I mean, you mentioned The Hours uses Virginia Woolf.
Yeah.
But I actually don't think I do know any others. No.
So,
well, actually, no, I take that back. It's funny. I just realized, who's the guy that wrote You and I about John Updike?
Mm-hmm. Baker.
Yeah, Nicholas and Baker. Yeah, that was a kind of the similar thing. Although Updike's not dead, I wasn't dead when he wrote it, but he did sort of. And then I just read Borges and I, or something like that, by Jay. He teaches up at Middlebury, but and that's a kind of similar thing. He did actually take a trip with Borges through Scotland, but he fictionalized. It was a mixture of fiction and nonfiction. Not that I did take a trip with Duras and Rhys, although I did. So those 2 books, the You and I and Borges and Me, or something like that, it sort of has the same kind of concept.
So had you just been reading or rereading Jean Rhys and Marguerite Duras, or were they already kind of whispering in your head?
No, they were whispering in my head. I had, you of anybody should know, I had the idea for a long time of bringing to life. I had tried before in another book, and the agent I had at the time said, I don't like the rest of the book, but I like the way you brought those 2 to life. And I thought, okay, then when it came time to write another book, maybe I'll try bringing them to life again. And so I did.
But had you read all their work, or did that inspire you to read all their work? Or
I think I had read all their work before this. Then when I decided to write this, I made a point of reading their bios, which I think I had already read, but I refreshed doing that. Yeah.
So you were in a sort of conversation with them then at that point. Yeah,
kind of.
So I'm very curious about the research, the actual research you did, because to me the dialogue sounds pretty pitch perfect. How did you concentrate on like getting into their heads, or did you read dialogue that was purportedly coming from them, like in a memoir or something?
No, it's truly my imagination of them, because, I mean, we don't know if it is pitch perfect. I mean, they may not have sounded like that at all, but they were the Jean Rhys in my mind and the Marguerite Duras in my mind. But probably if they were alive, they would be appalled at what I wrote. But that's how I heard them, so to speak.
Right, the fictionalized version. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it's all very sly, this meta-fictional device in which you combine biography with fiction, because it does show that you did research with regard to the actual circumstances of their lives. So I wondered, in order to create this effect, did you decide to set did you decide to set most of it in Vienna? Because to me, that is almost a fictional place in itself. So you don't look too closely. I mean, you don't look at Second Avenue either, but
right.
So you want to talk about why Vienna?
Yes. Well, there's a number of reasons for why Vienna. They both are European writers, so it would have been very bizarre. If they're coming back to life, they would, even though I do ostensibly meet them in New York, but if they're going to go on holiday, it seems likely they would go to Europe. If they're coming back to life, they most likely. Jean Rhys actually did love Vienna, although that wasn't really one of the reasons I said it there. And I don't know about Marguerite Duras' relationship to Vienna. But the other reason I said it in Vienna is that I had just returned from Vienna and I wanted to re-experience that trip. So I decided to set it in Vienna, and Prague is in it, and Vienna, and the main character's mother is Viennese. She has a backstory with Prague, with the Nazis. So basically, it was right to set it in Vienna. It was as magical as their coming back to life. I mean, going and living in the Sacher Hotel is not a normal thing to do. Unfortunately.
Yes, one kind of escape or another. That was fabulous. I just can't imagine writing there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. I wanted to know whether the oboe player was an excellent kisser, given the embouchure. You don't get into that. So let's talk about him, the lover who brought different kinds of flowers to her every day. And he was so assiduous. And he must have been very hard to develop as a character, since the heroine seems still so in love with the grim Oscar. So can you talk about that a little bit? The conflict between having two males. They weren't really head to head, but in terms of creating them, they were.
Well, I mean, I think the whole Viennese experience is fanciful. So falling in love with an oboe player in the Vienna Philharmonic in itself is kind of an enormous fantasy. I made him a sort of perfect lover to begin with.
Yes.
As to his kissing, which is something, by the way, Terese always asks me when we share our writing, well, where is the sex? As to his kissing, I mean, I think I make some reference that he makes love in the way that an oboe player would know how to make love.
I thought that was interesting. I played the oboe for a while, and you have to really get those lip muscles in good shape.
Exactly. Well, maybe you should speak about his kisses. But anyway, my intention with him, because of her nature, which I attribute a lot to be similar to my heroine's nature, is that she feels claustrophobic eventually. Yes. And he becomes petty. Mm-hmm. Or she experiences him as petty. So in the end, what these women, who all three were not the best at love affairs, to say the least, were more in love with writing about love than actually being involved in it.
Well, sometimes you have to step back anyway.
Yeah. Well, these particular three, I mean, there are very good writers that are better at love than these three, but but these particular three are not very talented in that department. Yes, go ahead.
May I ask a question? Just Terese, in listening to you ask this question, made me think about, and of course I can't remember his name, but the Connecticut man wasn't it The Bed You Lie In? Michael. So that similar kind of gray pants, cashmere sweater. We find these characters that are so different from Oscar and from these other characters.
Right.
So I mean, I seem to see them in something of the same, non-attainable. Somebody that you would be interested in, but yet knowing that for some reason or other, they weren't the kind of person that you'd really stay with.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I mean, one of the characteristics of Oscar is he's withholding. And so consequently, he doesn't make the ultimate demand on you. When someone like Gerhard makes that ultimate demand, or Michael, you withdraw because there's a fear involved or something involved that prevents you from taking that step. You want to talk to that?
Yeah, it's not you. It's Mira. I'll talk to that.
I meant Mira.
Okay, I know you did. I think that Mira is, I think she's very ambivalent about being involved with anyone.
Does she think, Gay, that does Mira think that because this character like Gerhard is asking for total commitment, that it will remove the impetus or the time or the energy to do the writing, which is really at the center of Mira's soul?
Yeah,
that part of it?
Yes. It's not that kind of man will take away your time, but there is this sort of a romance that goes on when you're creating stuff, or in her way, and that she is worried, perhaps incorrectly, of losing that romance. And I'm not saying Mira's right.
So, the novel's best trick is making you believe that dead authors come alive. And I quote you now, in the States, they give credit cards even to dead people, which I thought was a really great moment. Mira justifies, rationalizes their reality. I really like how you've done this. And there's another example. And now here I'm accepting the impossible as if it were a fresh direct delivery. Another, gesture toward the reality of the real world and not the world of 100 years ago. I can't remember now in our it's been a long time since we talked about this book. Was it something you had to work on in rewrites, or did it come to you easily? You just slotted them into contemporary life? Because that's the way it feels.
Yeah, I don't think I had to put myself in the mind that I had to get the reader to sort of fall in with the conceits, with the trick, so to speak. And so I had to have Mira kind of deal with her own feelings around that. And so, when she meets both of them, she's a little bit confused by the whole thing. And then, I make them, they don't know how to use the computer. I mean, I play some tricks, with them.
Well,
yeah.
He ever comes up to her and says, you're talking, to the door or the fence post or something. And there is, I think, a waiter that talks to them a few times, right? There are various other conversations.
Yes. Yeah. The bartender comes up to Jean Rhys. Yeah.
Yeah. So that,
you don't believe that? You don't believe that?
You just see, what movie was it? The water is going down their throats visibly and in a ghostly fashion. You don't deal with them as ghosts. You deal with them as real personages, which is, a trick of fiction. And it's wonderful.
Thank you. What does anybody else have thoughts about these books, or the trick of it? As well, how did it feel reading that? I mean, when I read You and I and the Borges book, I read them after I wrote my book. Maybe not You and I don't remember, but I was willing to suspend disbelief.
Yeah, because the interesting part is, the mystery is, why are they there? And you withhold that information for such a long time, really, and tease us with them coming to life and getting to know them. Then increases their veracity for the reader, I think.
I think what's amazing is that a book like this could fall into fantasy, but it doesn't. It maintains a very, very tight grip on reality, which is, I think, an amazing accomplishment, Gay, that you do that. Because really you're talking about some projection or trying to understand who they are, and it never falls into that fantasy level. It always has its solidity and feet on the ground. I think that's really an amazing accomplishment that you did.
Yeah, they came. I saw them as people.
Yes.
Well, yeah. I also think in different religions and a lot of what I've been reading recently in Buddhism or in some of the spirituality of Native Americans, there is this connection with the other, that we don't disappear, that the person's spirit is with us in one way or another. And so you've really identified them as people, but that whole idea of remembering to remember, and conjuring or channeling, when people talk about channeling someone, people.
Actually, Anna just sent a note. I don't know if she can talk on that, but she just said Greek drama does that all the time, which is, brings back
right
the voice, Hamlet's father. But I think that we all have we choose our ancestors. My character, it doesn't seem to be so close to her real ancestors, so she's chosen these two. They come to straighten her out, sort of.
Well, it's also the case that I think every writer has a set of other writers that have acted as muses and inspirations, and that you sense when you're writing that they're looking over your shoulder somehow. Okay, for me, for example, Henry Miller was a writer that was very important to me. And I always felt that he was whispering in his Brooklyn accent in my ear when I wrote certain passages. And I think there isn't a writer alive who hasn't felt that closeness, that connection to some other writer or writers. And I think what you've done is you've externalized that and made them into real people. And that's very interesting. That's fascinating.
I agree, Peter.
Very nice.
Yes. Yeah.
Or else you get into an argument with them and, want to write them out, which is equally as interesting. In this case, she was just looking for advice.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. No, it was actually a very fun book to write.
Can you put it in context, Gay, of it's always good to know the years, because it's clear, because we've had these, this is our fifth novel, we're coming up to the last one, that, again, as I mentioned before, you're looking at work. You're always talking about your work and your writing, and that's what really is important to you in life. So finally we get to that. That's what this book is. So what year, how did we see this progression? So from 1999, when you published the first.
Yeah. I wrote this particular book. The only reason I know it is I say in the first chapter, she's looking in the mirror and she says she's 59, turning 59. So that's when I know I was writing that book. Yeah. There's a sort of, it opens with a kind of desperation. What is she going to do? And, Jean Rhys was always a desperate character, but as I think I say, but she was a great writer, but she was just, and also, these women were not, I mean, Marguerite Duras became a star, and so did Jean Rhys late at 76. So there were things that were very fascinating to me about them, and I just read there just is a new Jean Rhys bio that just
have you read it?
Yeah, somebody gave it to me, and I thought, why do I want to read this? I've read enough about her, but I did, and what was interesting to me, not that I think I was so surprised, and I think I kind of intuited in the book, was that no matter how bad things were going in Jean Rhys's life, she was always writing. Mm-hmm. She was always writing, and nobody wanted her writing for a long time. But that's what she was always doing. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of interesting. So there was this woman who really screwed up her life. I mean, she was drunk. She was marrying, crazy people, fighting with a lot of people. Both these women were real fighters. But no matter what happened, how many, no heat, whatever, she was writing. It's kind of interesting.
Can you hear me okay, Gay?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm Sally. I just have loved this book. I haven't quite finished it. I thought I'd finish it before. I'm very close, but I'm probably about 50 pages away. But I just, again, am just so grateful, really, to Murphy, who's on the call, for having brought all of these books out. I mean, I've known you probably longer than anybody here, because we've been good friends since we were teenagers. I had no idea these beautiful works were in your drawer somewhere. So again, every time I see Murphy, I just want to thank you, Murphy, for bringing these books out. And they're such beautiful editions. I mean, they're so wonderful to hold. And yeah. I just, the artistry of that has been great. What you were talking about, you were saying, it's really a writer's book. And I thought, well, yes, and I could see that. Because I've known you, I think you've actually once gave me a book by Marguerite Duras, which I never read. I'm embarrassed to say. I've never read anything by Jean Rhys, nor have I ever read anything by Ford Madox Ford, who I've always heard of him, but I've just never read him. So, but I feel like I could really read them now with an understanding, because I guess that's what I really want to say, is that what comes across is not just a writer's book, but it's the integrity of an artist who really is an artist and who cannot stop writing. And I knew you many years ago, when you were 19, 20, and there was no encouragement around you to write. It wasn't practical. It wasn't good enough. It was just, you just always had to write. And this is such a gift that such a wonderful body of work that we have now that has come from all those hours and days and years of sitting there and writing. What I love about it is how actually I do see Mira as being quite different than Marguerite or Jean, the other authors, in that not in their commitment to writing, but that they did, Mira has not had a child, which I think is a really big deal. I've never had a child, and I don't yearn for that, but that's a whole other decision. And they were women that had children, each had, I guess, did one have two and one had one, or they at least each had one. And they also were women that men took care of in many ways financially. And what I see with Mira that is, so strong and quite different is her independence and how she guards that. And I've seen Oscar show up in other, books. I don't know if you called him Oscar, but that character that isn't able to commit emotionally for whatever reasons. And I understood it for the first time, I think, reading about someone like that just is always withholding, but seeing how that gives, as Peter was alluding to, it gives Mira the room to have someone in her life that she's attracted to, that she really does feel love for, but that is not, all encompassing. And so I see her as being a much more independent woman than maybe even the other two. But I'm loving the book, and I've loved all of them, and I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you.
Did anybody feel left out because that information wasn't totally given to you at the very beginning of the book? Although she does sketch it in as you're going along.
By the way, I have added I asked Gay to send a book list. So if you look in the chat, there's a list of books. I love getting to the end of the book. I was just reading one this weekend, with a bibliography. We don't find that in novels, but I think or just in a book I was reading, discography, where you have a playlist of music to listen to. I think that's very helpful. So the list that Gay sent to me is in the chat if anybody wants to look at it.
Actually, I did read Wide Sargasso Sea, but that was really all that I knew of Jean Rhys. And I didn't think it got in the way at all. I also didn't see it as necessarily a writer's book. I mean, yes, but not limited to that. But one thing I noticed as I was reading it, Marguerite Duras, her name was familiar, but as I was reading the description of the French, with her husband in the French Resistance, I realized I knew the story from a movie, Memoir of War, that was taken from her,
her memoir. She wrote the war.
Did she write it? I don't remember.
I don't think she wrote the movie, but it is based on her essays, the war.
It was just such an interesting way. For some reason, my screen keeps freezing, so I'll just keep talking. But it was such a fun way to realize I knew more than I did, that I was kind of, oh my God, I know this. I could picture it in the movie. It was a very powerful movie. It really touched me. And it kind of brought back that I remember it was based on a true story. And so that was really intriguing. But for me, both of them, I was thinking as Sally was talking, that these women coming back, they would have to be older. Like if they were the same age, it would be like, oh no, that just wouldn't have worked, because they had the motherly, like playing an older, we've been there. And it was just somehow having them as role models and vulnerable, like Jean with the two canes. And it really was fascinating. And in the beginning, you mentioned that they're telling her she doesn't trust her imagination. And I thought that was so ironic, because here's a writer who's imagining her favorite authors coming to life. And so, I don't know, it was very believable. I also liked that it wasn't that they weren't ghost-like, that they were just there. And then when Oscar shows up, it's like, how did he get there? It didn't matter. This was fiction. I felt like we're everything is imaginary. And we're the two men Marguerite and Jean went off with, were they alive, or were they? No, they were. Maybe they were back too. It didn't matter. It was all like, we're in just a totally imaginary world, but seeing what this means to Mira, it really. So anyway, to me, it made me interested in reading more, like going back to Jean Rhys, because I remember Wide Sargasso Sea really touched me. And I remember it being beautiful writing. But for whatever reason, I never read other of her work. And it kind of made me more interested in Marguerite Duras too. So that's it. Thank you.
Yeah. Brenna, did you know that you're extremely well read? Did you know the two writers?
I had read them, but honestly, I had read them so long ago. I had just the sort of a sense of the books that they had written. I had, the sense of the atmosphere or whatever, but it didn't matter. You gave enough of the life, and I know others have said this, but in such a way that it was so interwoven with the whole story about the writer, to have the biography come in like that. I mean, I just thought that was really marvelous how you did that. I had no problem at all with whether they were real or everybody was totally real as far as I was concerned. And I loved how you did it. The other thing I think someone did briefly mention is, and I can't find them all now, but there were so many places where it was just funny. I mean, there was one place I think where one of them says, "Let's go for a walk." Something about walking at this age, whatever age I might be. Like she doesn't even know what age she is. But there were several other places like that just really made me laugh. I mean, you should see my book. I have underlined just about every other page has got something underlined on it. The sentences are so wonderful. Even you can take them out of context and they're still good. Yeah.
There was I did get to have a lot of fun. I think there's a line where I tell one of them, I haven't asked you about God yet. And,
I mean, your writing is so felicitous that it really just rewards, every sentence rewards. I mean, it's just a pleasure to read it. That's very unusual with a writer, where every sentence has something delicious. And I think I used that word when I was writing to you directly. I do have one critique, however, instead of this, which is I would have liked to have seen or heard Jean and Marguerite reflect a little bit more on their lives, okay?
Mm-hmm.
It seemed that they were there as companions, really, and as projections. But I would have liked to have heard a little bit more about Jean and her husband, her first husband, and Marguerite Duras, and how she wrote The Lover. Just a little bit more, not a lot more, but just enough to give them a little more texture.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. Where were you when I was? That is a good idea. I agree. That would have been good. I should have done that. Yeah.
Well, so what you really did, though, is you sketched out the emotional truth rather than the material world. And so, bestsellers have the material world down, but they don't have the truth, the emotional logic that people understand and follow through. And it doesn't matter how gossamer, the people are, it matters mostly if you believe them.
Mm-hmm. That's such a good comment, Terese, because I think of Gay's book. She has stripped away politics and contemporary life. I mean, we're looking at the relationship. We're looking at, the psychological, relationship between men and women. Yes. And so we don't need perhaps more detail.
Yeah.
More specifics about history, more historical. It is like a historical information, possibly.
So it's really a book about ideas. And in this case, the women advance in time, but the eternal idea is, what about love? And so, you're not waiting for the shoe to drop, as it were, or the murderer to be found. I wanted to know whether or not you really did want her to find love at the end, or were you happy with how she resolved the situation?
I almost stopped reading when I thought Oscar, is that his name, was going to come back. I was like, no, I can't read this. This is how it's going to end. I just couldn't. So I loved the ending because I thought it left possibilities open. But it did kind of answer she had gotten to some of the place where the women coming back had wanted to get to. So I thought the ending was perfect.
Yeah. I wanted her to have a shot that the women had affected her. So there's two men, the philanthropist, although you don't really know what's happening. And then, of course, the real man at the music in the last scene. Yeah. Well, maybe the philanthropist was real. I don't know.
Let's ask Murphy how the book, what you thought about how it relates to all the others in the series.
Yeah, I was thinking about that today because what I feel like there's something happening both in the writer and in the protagonist here that finally, like in the fifth book, we feel like she can have some magic, like something crazy can happen, like she can kind of fall through a window and meet, Duras or Rhys, or sit on a bench. That there's somehow that she's resolved some questions if you want to go back and look at it psychologically, there's some things resolved with the mother and the father. She's put them to bed, so to speak. And so there's something kind of opening. Of course, we still have, some of the, mother in bed you lie in as she's passing away, but there's something blowing open. And I thought it was perfect timing, both in the writer as she's writing it and also in the main character. And the second thing is I love that I feel like she's being transformed, both the writer and Mira, by the words of these writers, which is what, why we read, right? We read because we want, to be influenced or to be moved. And you definitely feel this is what's happening to her here. And she's open to it. She's willing because she's kind of put other things behind and she can go forward now. So anyway, that's what I was thinking. So.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, there's that scene where they're in Prague and the women are talking and they're just out and also, yeah, I think in Prague, both scenes where they're having dinner and it's not what they're talking about. It's just that they're together. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm. So was this one, were they published in the order in which you wrote them? I do remember this is right. Oh, they were Murphy. Oh, good. That's fascinating.
Yeah, they were. Where's Paul? Did you have a question?
It seemed the other books in the series were very, very grounded in reality. And this book seemed so freeing. It was like, her imagination soared. It was like she used these two women, not just as an inspiration for her writing, but also for a kind of love that she hadn't experienced before. So it was just so beautifully done. I mean, I just felt like the whole book, it just soared from beginning to end.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Paul. I mean, my intention was that the women were healing her, that the love they were giving her was healing her, and I guess it's not a spoiler for Sally because you haven't read the end, but they disappear at the end. So, and then she's back in reality. She's back where she met Jean Rhys.
This is a book I would love to see. I told this to Gay. This is a book I'd love to see made into a movie. I think this would be an amazing movie, really would. And I encourage Gay to write a treatment and find a good agent because, I think
he's working on it.
Good. I think it would be an amazing movie.
Yeah.
Get a French guy.
Yeah, we Murphy and I thought about doing it that way because, the French government will fund movies that will put in some money if it's a French icon, which Duras is, it's part of their, but it's also, it's a little tricky because it's an old these two writers, I don't know how much they're in the lexicon now. I don't know.
I don't think that would matter. And I think Vienna is such a character in the movie. It's just so beautiful that so much is placed there. I thought too, it would be a great movie.
Music,
absolutely. And another thing is, I really usually, when I have to start suspending my disbelief, I've never been really into science fiction much. I mean, but I usually just it interrupts where I'm in and in reading. If all of a sudden, dragons start flying around, I go, okay. Or even in movies sometimes. But I have to say that the everybody has said this, and I agree. Just for somebody that usually doesn't like that, I usually don't like suspending my disbelief with characters that are coming back from the dead. It was such an easy transition and so interesting. I didn't have any problem at all with this. I just thought, yeah, this kind of just makes sense, and it was just this book. As most of your writing I see does, but actually I do believe that, but there was a flow here. And as Paul said, there was a freedom here also, an excitement of what's going to happen next that has just been great, just to be reading it.
So I have a question for you, Gay, kind of along that line. So the women go into their rooms and start writing again. And of course, that makes them even more believable. asserting that they do something. It's like in the movies when they never show the writer writing. So it sort of increases the energy of the narrative. But were you tempted to develop this alternative meta story further?
No, no, because that would have interrupted their story, and I wanted to stick to the front story, that would be an imaginary story. I didn't want to write an imaginary story. It was imaginary already enough. Do you know what I mean? So I didn't want to ask the reader, okay, now you got to imagine Marguerite Duras and Jean Rhys came back to life, and you got to imagine a whole other story. I thought that was too much, and I thought it would interfere with the line. But showing their writing was really a way to show their characters. The little I did show of the three people's writing was really just to show their characters. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a bit like the Russian dolls. You get to the last one and you're still kind of unscrewing it there.
I was going to follow up on Sally because I'm the same way about fantasy, science fiction, no interest at all in, oh no, I want reality. And so even when I heard about when you Gay described this book, I thought, okay, we'll see. And I'm going to read it because I'm here for all 6 books, but it was so refreshingly real. And just the way the three of them related, it was just so believable and fun. The two women were, the characters, it really worked. And also about them not being in the lexicon, I think that makes it more intriguing as a movie idea, because who are they? And it sort of introduces people to writers they might not know in such an interesting way.
Please subscribe. You can connect with us.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Elizabeth Howard.
Teresa, you have any thoughts?
You don't have to. ElizabethHoward.com. You can find us on Spotify.
I wondered whether or not you were permanently influenced by the two of them, and the next book will show their imprint.
Join us next time when we engage.
Well, that's an interesting thing you're bringing up. I have been compared to both of them, because I've been compared to Jean Rhys because I write about a woman who is usually broke, usually unlucky in love, blah, blah, blah. So I write about that kind of a woman. I'm not writing about suburban, multimillionairesses or whatever. I've been compared also to Marguerite Duras because I am not, I don't describe settings a lot, and I'm bare bones in some ways. And so is she. So, who came first, them or me? I mean, I don't feel that I really get influenced, but that could be an illusion of mine. But I do, and I don't feel like, oh, well, I'm going to get off this call and start writing like those two. I mean, I think I've been sort of blessed by life that I have, I have trouble writing plots, but I have a voice. Do you know what I mean? My strength is not plots. If we had to all create a plot right now, I'd probably come in the bottom third or maybe the bottom. But I always had a voice, but my voice is, and I'm slightly experimental. I mean, I'm always playing around. So that Duras was a little bit like that. And I think it was natural. I think Jean Rhys, I say it in the book, she was a natural writer. Ford Maddox Ford said that about her. She just was a natch. She just sat. She didn't. I don't think she studied it. I don't really remember. And Duras was a natch. So
one thing I would love to see, Gay, is selections from your books, because you really are an aphoristic writer.
Yes.
Your observations are amazing. You have a book of aphorisms, and people should read it if they haven't read it. It's an amazing book. But I think I can, of all the 5 books we've read so far, I can pick out so many passages that would stand by themselves in a compilation that I really think you should think about doing something like that.
Okay.
Peter, that's one reason we published Erotic Fire, because it was aphorisms. And I mean, the great thing about Gay is she can write a book on aphorisms, but there's a whole storyline weaving through the whole thing. That's the great thing about you, Gay. And your aphorisms, by the way, they're dropping them on Instagram if you want to just see bits and pieces of the little things that she does right are dropped in.
They are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I like this book. It made me think. And there was particular pages about how it is that Mira, or the character in this book, and it's 108, on page 108, in the italics. And the idea, the ethos of suffering comes through the book. And I wondered how it is that a woman who seems so vibrant would get so stuck in that ethos. So I walked around for a couple of days, hobbling around rather. What is it about torturous behavior that's so attractive? And then I just couldn't relate to it. And the only way I could relate to it was the Greek drama of the Furies. And so I went back and I thought, oh, Gay's really writing about what it takes to write. Is the drawing from the self, the torture, the endless questioning, the whole drama of trying to make something right. So that came through. When I got that, I said, that's maybe what the torture is about. After all, the title of the book is right, she said. So that is something that came through really clearly to me. And there are other comments I have to say. I think I agree with Murphy about the sense of efficacy that emerges. And you see that come out very strongly in different parts of the narrative. And so you see a woman strengthened, not by necessarily the suffering, but the resolution and the hope it's about to emerge. And it does at the end. I like the ending very much.
I like the ending too. Well, your time is up. And I so appreciate all of you coming on because you've all been regulars. And I so appreciate it. It's been very fun to do with you. It's hard reading these old books. It's really, it's hard. It's kind of nice having a posse with me, and because it's, it's a lot of feelings, whether they're Marguerite's or mine. And Anna, the thing about the italicized, maybe you knew this, is that's not my writing. That's actually quotes. The italics are the quotes of the writers.
Right.
But you probably knew that.
Well, you did quote Winnicott. It's not safe to feel, it's better to think. So It's frightening to expose all the feelings of all these characters. And so that's kind of always going to be a push and pull experience for both the author and the reader, I think.
Yeah. I mean, these books have been difficult. I mean, this is actually a little nicer than the rest of them, but the early four, but they've been really difficult. A lot of feeling, a lot of pain. Hopefully, I mean, there's a sort of wry humor usually of some sort, not always, but so that kind of gets you through at least the last one and this one.
Even though, Gay, you quoted it, I saw Marguerite and Jean as your alter egos. I saw you saying that through them.
Yes.
So that it became imagination. Imaginary figures don't bother me at all. In fact, I prefer to hear the delusion and illusions, maybe through another character or person, but it's all reflective, parts of self come through very clearly.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, those two writers that affect me, were not easy people. We're not, but I think what moved me so much is that besides the quality of their writing, is their indomitableness. They were incredibly indomitable, Jean, at least in keeping writing. And Marguerite did a lot of stuff. She made movies, she wrote plays, she essays, and she was, like Terese. Anyway. So, all right. So thank you so much. You can go eat dinner.
Thank you. We have our last meeting is on November 15th, which is a Tuesday evening, 6:30. And I would just like to end with a just reading one paragraph that I liked. It's on page 104. So now Marguerite was probably in a room writing about a woman knowing the world has gone mad and finding a man to make love to who is neither German, Austrian, French, nor European. He is the other, not particularly safe either, she would find out, because love isn't safe. But her character would find some unsafe means of finding safety. Her character would find it through loving the other, and then through that, the world. So thank you, Gay.